speech and audio therapist, so it's a good opportunity for me to understand your views since we belong together as a part of the rehabilitation team. So what we are going to be talking today on is the relationship between posture and respiration in cerebral palsy patients. Now, breathing, respiration is essential to us as human beings. The first task that you do after taking birth and the last task that you do before you die. Now, human life is sustained by regular automatic and synchronous breathing. If there are any alterations in that, your quality of life gets compromised. As a developing child, the child is even more dependent upon normal respiration if you are working on him to achieve a good quality of life. So I, as a physical therapist, observe the cost of abnormal breathing when I do the exercises on the patients. And I'm sure you, as speech and language therapists, when it comes to the domains of human communication, understand the importance of respiration. Now, what we are going to be talking about today is the relationship between certain key postures and the respiratory biomechanics and how it affects the process of respiration. So just to briefly introduce what is cerebral palsy, it's a non-progressive insult to developing brain that results in motor, sensory and perceptual issues. Motor development is going to be affected due to poor postural control, balance and automatic reactions. A brief snapshot of how cerebral palsy is classified. You have spastic, you have athetoid, you have ataxic hypotonic, and you have mixed variety. In the spastic versions, you have hemiplegia, diplegia, and quadriplegia. In the dyskinetic versions, you have athetoid and dystonic CP. And in the ataxic one, you have the hypotonic ataxic cerebral palsy. Now let's briefly go over the normal postural development as it happens from a neonate till the child is able to walk independently. So as the normal development happens, there is a gradual progression from a complete flexion that is seen at the time of birth to a more mature and a gradual bipedal posture. Now this change in biomechanics happens due to the change in the spinal curvatures that move our center of mass distally. So our center of mass is situated at the second sacral vertebra, and as the postural development happens from a more proximal alignment, it goes to the distal alignment. The type of breathing that is normally seen in a neonate is a belly breathing or abdominal breathing, which gradually changes to a more thoraco-abdominal type of breathing in response to the change in posture, in response to your change from a complete flex posture to a bipedal posture. The respiration also changes along with that. So I'm sure you understand the gist that there is a relationship between postural development and normal respiration. So if you just briefly go over the normal postural development, from 0 to 3 months, that is birth to 3 months, you have a complete flexion where gradually you have the head control emerging towards the end of 3 months. Between 3 to 6 months, you have a good head control and the child is also able to do prone on elbows and prone on hands. You also see a movement called pivot prone, where the child is able to weight bear on one hand and turn on that hand to reach out for the other things. Between 6 to 9 months, you have the ability to sit supported and then gradually unsupported. And it is at this point that you start developing your spinal curvatures. The spinal curvatures of thoracic spine, that is thoracic kyphosis, and cervical lordosis, and eventually the lumbar lordosis. Between 9 to 12 months, you have crawling on all the 4 extremities. If not, you may skip that milestone. The child pulls himself up to stand, and there is development of pelvic control and lumbar lordosis. Eventually, the child stands with support and stands independently and starts cruising and walking. Now, before we go into the abnormal respiratory patterns and the postural, abnormalities that are seen in cerebral palsy, let's just review the normal respiratory biomechanics. As you can see in this diagram, you have muscles of inspiration and muscles of expiration. The primary muscle of inspiration is obviously the diaphragm, okay, which is a dome-shaped structure arising out of the posterior part of sternum and the lower ribs, okay, and it is the chief muscle of respiration. Apart from that, you have the external intercostals, which assist in the chest expansion, and you have accessory muscles of breathing or accessory muscles of inspiration, which is the sternocleidomastoid, the scalenii, and the upper fibers of trapezius. Okay, and the muscles of expiration. Now, usually expiration is obviously a passive process, but if you have a forced expiration like coughing or huffing, in that case, you have all the abdominal muscles, that is your rectus, internal external obliques, and transverse abdominis, which is assisted by the internal intercostals. Okay, I would want you to appreciate the change in the alignment of muscle fibers of external and internal intercostals. It is the change in alignment that does the different function of inspiration versus expiration. All right. Now, before we go further, there are two key important biomechanical terms which are very simple to understand, but they are vital to your chest expansion and respiration. Okay. Now, the first diagram that you see over here, the diagram A that is shown over here, you see the movement of sternum, the rib, and the vertebrae that the rib is attached to. Okay. This happens in the upper part of the rib cage. Okay, where when the chest expansion or when the inspiration happens, the sternum goes from posterior to anteriorly and superiorly. Okay, so it moves like this. The rib turns or twists along its own axis, and if you can see the junction between the vertebrae and the rib over here, okay, there is a gradual movement at that level as well. Now, if you compare this movement with a picture of a hand pump, which I'm sure a lot of you must have seen, okay, the movement of the hand pump and the movement of the sternum are exactly the same, which is why this movement is called as a pump handle movement. Okay, the pump handle movement that is seen in the upper part of the rib cage, okay, where the sternum goes anteriorly and superiorly. So in short, it increases your anteroposterior dimension or the anteroposterior chest expansion. Okay, now you go to diagram B, where you see the lower part of the rib cage over here. Now the lower ribs, or especially the floating ribs, okay, they move during normal respiration like the handle of a bucket. Now, if you can imagine the picture of a bucket and the handle that moves from vertical to horizontal, it is exactly the same movement that is seen in case of the lower ribs. Okay, as you can appreciate in the diagram over here, this is how the movement occurs. So primarily it is the movement of the ribs along its own axis, and also the junction between the sternum and the rib anteriorly, and the vertebrae and the ribs posteriorly. Okay, this movement is called as a bucket handle movement. So the pump handle movement seen in the anterior part of the rib cage, and the bucket handle movement seen in the posterior part of the rib cage. Now, along with that, obviously you have, as I told you, there is a movement of the the rib cage or the ribs along with the vertebrae, and the rotational movements of the ribs along its own axis. Okay, so why are these terms and these movements important to you all if you are working with posture and if you are working with respiration? Because this is where the impairment lies in case of a cerebral palsy patient. Okay, whether it is a spastic child, an athetoid child, or a hypotonic ataxic child, these joints are the ones that will give you problems, and that is what you have to work upon if you need them to have an ideal respiration. So I hope that's clear. Now I'm going to show you a brief video. I'm sure all of you can appreciate the movement of diaphragm as it goes from a dome-like structure to a completely flattened structure. And if you can appreciate the movement of the upper ribs, okay, where it goes, oh, I'm sorry, oh, where it goes in the upper rib cage, it goes with the increase in the anteroposterior diameter. And if you see the lower ribs, you will see the gradual increase in the transverse diameter. So this is what I meant about the pump handle movement and the bucket handle movement. So I hope it's clear so far. We are going to go ahead and talk about the abnormal postural control in cerebral palsy and the relationship with respiration. Now, this is a very basic diagram which shows the curves of spine. Okay. Normally, you have a natural cervical lordosis, you have a thoracic kyphosis, and a lumbar lordosis. Okay. Now, any of these curves, when they get abnormally exaggerated, like in case of kyphosis over here, or in case of lordosis over here, or in case of scoliosis over here, you can imagine the effect it has on the rib cage and the muscles. Okay, it's not hard to imagine what would happen to the anterior part of the rib cage over here. Okay, or to the alignment of diaphragm and abdominals over here, or again the rib cage and the restriction of rib cage on the side of your convexity. Okay, so any postural curve which is abnormally exaggerated is going to give you an issue with respiration. I just want you all to look at these pictures and observe them. As you can see in the first two pictures, okay, you see a adult cerebral palsy person and a child, both having abnormal sitting positions. Okay, can you guess what would happen to their respiration? Can you guess what would happen to their volumes and capacities? Okay, it is obvious that they are going to compromise on their breathing. So when you are dealing with them, you need to change the alignment first. Unless you change the alignment, you don't expect a normal breathing. And if there is no normal breathing, you don't expect a person to cooperate with you. If you see over here, you see abnormal head control. You see a child which is so floppy that the head is completely towards the gravity. What do you think happens to the flexors of neck and the anterior part of the rib cage? Similarly, if you see this baby whose head is hanging towards gravity, if you can see the overstretching of the cervical flexors and the stacking of the head, all of these compromise upon your respiration. Okay, so your first job is to have a perfect postural alignment to ensure normal breathing. All right, now as I said, we are going to be discussing two important postural milestones or two important postures which are very important to us as physical therapists and to you all. I'm sure I'm talking about sitting and having a good head control. Okay, a good head control, if you can see in the picture here, gives you a very good visual engagement. So if you're trying to talk to the child or if you're trying to play with the child, it is extremely important that the child has a good amount of head control. Similarly, if you have a child in a sitting position, it's much easier to devise any play therapy for the child. And I'm sure it must be very easy for you all to communicate if you achieve sitting. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about anything else because we have a time limitation. We are going to be talking about sitting and head control. So when you talk about head control, normal head control allows the extensors to be activated, leading to a smooth cervical lordotic curve. It is going to give you a balanced activation of cervical flexors and extensors, and there is obviously an independent mobility between upper and lower cervical spine. Please remember, when you say a good head control, it means that you should be able to move your upper and the lower cervical spine independently along with the atlanto-occipital junction. Okay. The maintenance of normal craniovertebral angle also depends upon the independent flexion of the upper cervical spine. And the accessory muscles of inspiration, like your upper trapezius and scalenii, they originate from the cervical spine. And if your head control is abnormal, like you're hanging towards gravity, these are the muscles which are going to become extremely tight. And these are the muscles which have their insertion on the upper rib cage. And that's where you're going to have a problem when you are dealing with a child with a poor head control. So smooth pump handle movement of the upper thorax is going to depend upon the perfect alignment of cervical vertebrae with relaxed accessory muscles of inspiration like upper trapezius and scalenii. Okay. There should be an independent movement between the atlanto-occipital junction, upper and lower cervical spine. Okay. An independent activation of cervical flexors and extensors is a must for a good head control. So what happens in case of cerebral palsy? You can see in the picture over here, this is called a His stacking. Head stacking means you're not able to take care of the load of your head. That means the head mass. Okay, you don't have enough strength in your muscles and you're just hanging towards gravity. Okay, this is an extremely poor postural alignment with severe repercussions on your breathing and respiration. Why? Because there is poor activation of cervical extensors, there is overstretching and thereby inhibition of cervical flexors. There is going to be tightness of upper trapezius and scaleni. There is absolutely no movement seen at atlanto-occipital joint and upper and lower cervical spine. And there is a majorly altered craniovertebral angle which affects the origin of cervical flexors inserting upon the rib cage. So let's go to independent sitting and respiration now. Now, independent normal sitting with normal kyphosis and lordosis facilitates diaphragmatic breathing. Okay, so if you happen to maintain the normal curves, or if you try and facilitate normal alignment, you're going to have a normal diaphragmatic breathing. Okay, as I said, the origin of diaphragm is going to be from the lower ribs, from the sternum, and if that is altered, the position of diaphragm is also altered, giving you very poor diaphragmatic excursion. Normally, the line of gravity is going to pass anterior to the thoracic spine and posterior to lumbar spine. Now, that kind of arrangement, it is going to facilitate co-contraction between your abdominals and back extensors, and that allows for a proper segmental expansion at all the three levels of the chest wall, that is your upper, middle, and lower chest wall. Okay, so that's what is normal independent sitting. Now let's go through the abnormal sitting postures that are seen in cerebral palsy. This is a classic sacral sitting posture, which is seen in case of spastic diplegic most often, also in spastic quadriplegic. Okay, basically what you see over here is a C-shaped curve. You no longer see the difference between the cervical lordosis, thoracic kyphosis, and lumbar lordosis. It's a big, giant C-shaped curve. So as I explained you earlier, what happens to the anterior part of the rib cage and the diaphragm, they are all going to get tight and compromised in their excursion. So naturally, the breathing is going to get affected. Also, additionally, it is going to produce stiffness at the costovertebral junction and also tightness of rectus abdominis and the pectorals. I'm sure everybody is familiar with rectus abdominis. It is a part of your six-pack abs. It is one of the largest muscles of the body, strongest muscles because it also contains part fascia. Okay, so it is very easy to get tight for rectus abdominis, and this position that you see the child sitting in facilitates a lot of rectus tightness. All right. So in both these postural uh, impairments in case of cerebral palsy, I have listed out a few impairments at the musculoskeletal level and the neural level because those impairments become your problem list. And that is what you're going to work upon when you deal with their postural alignment. Okay. So what are the musculoskeletal impairments? You have limited mobility at the costovertebral joints. You have spasticity of the inspiratory muscles. There is tightness of rectus abdominis, which alters the thoracic curve. There is altered pelvic alignment, leading to the flattening of lumbar lordosis, and you have a lot of issues with the thoracolumbar junction with a hinge-like mobility there. There is often presence of osteoporosis, which leads to frequent rib fractures. The neural impairments are the absence of sighing mechanism. Now, I'm not sure if you are familiar with this, but a sigh is an involuntary, complete, deep breath, which is like an automatic reaction when you are really tired, when you are stressed out, or when you suddenly become stress free. Okay, it's like saying a big ah. Okay, now all of us are programmed to do that at least 5 to 6 times in a day, more so if you're tired. Okay, what does that ensure? It ensures a complete expansion of the lungs, and it expands your lung to your total lung capacity. Okay, this mechanism is naturally absent in children with cerebral palsy. You can imagine the effect that it would have. A good deep breath releases everything and makes you feel good. So if you don't have that kind of mechanism, you are forever constricted. Imagine that along with a poor sitting posture, which constricts you even further. So you can appreciate the breathing difficulties the children face. Okay. So this is the first neural impairment that you have to think of. The second one is abnormal presence of all the primitive reflexes and especially the tonic labyrinthine reflex. Okay. That is the one where in supine position, your extensors get facilitated, and sometimes you see an opisthotonous posture. An opisthotonous is a sudden contraction of all the extensors of your spine, so it gives you a curve. Okay. Along with that, you have cerebellar involvement in the ataxic CP, which gives sometimes to arrhythmical breathing, and you have central hypotonia. Now, the neural impairments are something that you cannot work upon, apart from the primitive reflexes, which you can inhibit. But apart from that, there is very little you can do about the neural impairment. So, your chief objectives for treatment are going to be your musculoskeletal impairments. All right. So, let's go through the types of CP and how it affects breathing. Spastic CP is a type of CP where there is hypertonia of the anti-gravity muscles. The anti-gravity muscles are flexors in the upper limbs and extensors in the lower limbs, which is going to lead to fixed posturing and stiffness of movements, classified as spastic and spastic diplegia, quadriplegia, and hemiplegia. Now, I've tried to make a snapshot so that it becomes easier for you to understand as to what happens to each postural muscle and respiratory muscle in case of a spastic CP. The first category is a weak muscle. The first important weak muscle in all the spastic CPs is diaphragm. Okay. Along with being weak, it is also tight. That is a unique trait that diaphragm has. Okay. The tighter it becomes, the weaker it gets. Okay. Apart from that, the weak muscles are going to include your internal, external obliques and the transversus abdominis. Basically, all the core muscles, the global and the local back extensors. Okay. So when you say weak muscles, your solution is going to be strengthening or strength training of those weak muscles. Coming to tight muscles, diaphragm, rectus abdominis, and pectorals. Okay. So the solution is stretch the tight muscles. And you have the spastic muscles, that is the intercostals, where you have to inhibit the spasticity. I'm sure it is self-explanatory, but I'll be more than happy to answer any questions if you have. So this is how a rib cage looks like in case of a spastic CP. If you can appreciate the X-ray and if you can appreciate the horizontal ribs, okay, as compared to this, which is a more oblique arrangement of the ribs. As the ribs go down, they start becoming oblique. Okay. So what happens when you have horizontal ribs? Horizontal ribs are due to the spasticity of the intercostals. Okay. So when you have horizontal ribs, what happens? They in turn put diaphragm at a mechanical disadvantage. Okay. I told you earlier also, because of the insertion and the origin of diaphragm, okay, it is dependent upon the sternum and rib cage for a good alignment. The sternum and rib cage alignment changes, diaphragm alignment changes, diaphragm becomes completely ineffective, and your primary respiratory muscle, your primary inspiratory muscle is going to be at a disadvantage. All right. So what are the management strategies? Spastic intercostals and the tight muscles. Okay. There is a technique called myofascial release, which is a hands-on technique whereby you try and release the muscle and the fascia, which gives you immediate, almost an instantaneous release of those muscles and a good range of excursion for diaphragm. Okay, I've included some videos on the same, so I'll be able to demonstrate it to you. Same goes for facilitation of the rib cage using proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, manual therapy for the alignment of sternum, and stretching of rectus abdominis. For weak back extensors, you're going to be doing strength training. For stiff thoracic spine and costovertebral junction, you're going to be doing manual mobilization of the spine and the thoracolumbar junction, okay, along with the costochondral and the costovertebral junctions. So let's go through the hypotonic ataxic CP. Now, hypotonia of the truncal muscles give very poor activation of the trunk muscles, okay, which means that for all practical purposes, the muscles are not working, okay. The underlying problem is that there is very poor proprioceptive feedback that, uh, because the proprioception does not reach the cortex, the pyramidal tracts in turn do not facilitate the responsible truncal muscles and thereby causing a central hypotonia. Okay, so the resultant posture is a C-shaped thoracic spine with an exaggerated kyphosis and shortening of the anterior structures. Okay, and chest expansion is compromised at all the three levels. Again, let's see the muscle activation pattern in hypotonic CP. Now here the weakness is more. Okay, so you have diaphragm, intercostal, back extensors, and all the abdominals being weak. So your emphasis here is to strengthen those muscles and to improve their existing tone, okay, so that they are able to get activated faster. Again, even in here, you're going to have tight rectus abdominis and pectorals, which you will have to stretch in your management. So, poor activation and tone of diaphragm and intercostals. You're going to use PNF for facilitation. You're going to use adjuncts like weighted jackets and crepe bandages to stimulate proprioceptors. I'm going to show you pictures of the same. There is weakness. Okay, as I told you, there is a lot of weakness of all the trunk extensors, trunk flexors, as well as the inspiratory and expiratory muscles. Okay, so you're going to be doing strength training of the back extensors with abdominals and core muscles using the submaximal exercise training principles. You have tight anterior muscles, which you have to stretch using myofascial release, and an orthotic application is going to be a good idea to facilitate and maintain good posture. So this is what I was talking about when you say weighted jacket. A jacket looks like this. Okay, you have pockets in here where you can put additional weights in those pockets up to 1 to 1.5 kgs. It gives you a downward traction, so facilitating the approximation and stretching the muscles, thereby adding on to the proprioception. Okay, so this is the use of adjuncts when you are treating a hypotonic ataxic child. Okay, this diagram over here on the right side shows you the position for release of diaphragm with myofascial release. Okay, if you can see the thumbs of the examiner, okay, right where your manubrium sterni ends, right where your sternum ends, okay, you're going to dig your thumb inside. You're going to actually palpate the dome shaped diaphragm and you're going to stretch it. Okay, so this is a picture of myofascial release of diaphragm. All right, now I understand if you you are not able to do all those techniques that I told you earlier. Okay, but there are very simple things that you, even as a speech and language therapist, can do to facilitate a good posture, and it doesn't require a lot of effort. Okay, if you can appreciate the diagram on the left side, you can see the completely abnormal sitting position the child has. Okay, and if you have to work with a person like this, the respiration is going to be extremely difficult. Okay, now you just need to have slight arrangement in the sitting. Okay, if you can appreciate the back support over here, and if you can appreciate the downward slant of the wedge that the child is sitting on, okay, it helps you to facilitate good posture and stabilize sitting. It is always easier to work with a child which is stabilized, like the picture shown on the right side, as compared to the picture that is seen on the left side. Okay, now these are the orthotic applications that I was talking to you about. Not orthotic applications exactly, but comfortable sitting chairs or corner sitting if you don't have those sitting chairs available. Okay, if you have these kind of gadgets with you, please use them while you are dealing with a CP child. Okay, this encourages normal posture and it gives you a great visual engagement, whether you are playing with the child or you are treating the child. Okay, in the absence of both of these, you can always use a corner sitting, which means a V-shaped sitting with support on both the sides of the truck. Okay, so that it's easier for the child to maintain erect sitting position. All right, now these are some of the videos that I have. Uh, Tanvi, do I have time?
Yes, ma'am. We can play the videos.
Thank you so much. Okay, now what he is showing you right now, okay, is the palpation of diaphragm along with the thumb tucked inside. Okay, how do you give PNF for diaphragm? Okay, just observe the video closely. First, you have to just palpate and see the regular breathing. Okay, next, with every expiration, you need to push your hand inside. The more you push your hand inside, the more it comes up. Okay, and in the last part, as the person is breathing, you add resistance manually with your hand. Okay, you can use your hand, you can use a book. Okay, so as you resist the diaphragm, it is going to give you strengthening of diaphragm. Okay, this is the next video that I had thought for y'all. Okay, now I want you to observe the hand placement. Now one hand is on the upper chest, the next hand is on the diaphragm. If you can see the two circles, okay, you are asking the patient to facilitate the movement of alternate hands. Okay, as you take a deep breath in, it is your stomach that comes up. As you do expiration, it is your chest wall that comes up. Okay, you can place your hands in an oblique direction to facilitate a segmental expansion of the lung. Okay, now these become great warm-up exercises. Okay, again, these exercises require the patient's cooperation, so you need to do it in children who are capable of understanding commands. This may not be applicable in case of neonates. Okay, this is third video that I had got for you all. Okay, now what you can see over here is an individual facilitation of the ribs. Okay, especially the intercostal muscles. Okay, you need to put your fingers, okay, or your thumb on the superior surface of the lower rib and your fingers, okay, on the inferior surface of the lower ribs. If you can see the alignment of fibers, okay, you need to align your fingers and hand on your thumb in such a way that you give traction in the opposite directions. Okay, so basically you are stretching that muscle, okay, that helps you for facilitation. Now this is especially done when you have a spastic CP, okay, and you have a very limited chest expansion and the child is just not able to take enough air inside. So you can use this technique to improve upon the respiration. All right.
Ma'am, we have around 5 minutes left.
Am I okay? I think I'm going to 1 second. Please hold on. Am I audible?
Yes. Yes.
I'm sorry. I think I seem to have logged out in between. All right. Am I audible now? Hello.
Yes. Yes, yes.
All right. Okay. So that's what you saw in videos in terms of treatment techniques that you can perform on children. Now, before we go further or before actually we wind up the whole session, there are some red flags that you need to understand in terms of respiratory distress. Okay. Uh, when you're treating a child and the child gives you respiratory distress, it is extremely important for you to pick it up and stop therapy right then and there. Okay. The red flags are going to be first general irritability and restlessness. You have a throaty guttural sounds that the child makes like he's snoring. He starts gasping for breath. There are a lot of attempts to sigh. There is opisthotonus, frequent opisthotonus actually to avoid doing any movements. Okay. And obviously you have pallor and cyanosis if the oxygenation is going to be poor. Why is it important for you to know these signs? Because they are potentially dangerous. If you keep making the child work when he is having distress, you need to align his posture. You need to take care of facilitation of right muscles and then start with the therapy. Okay, with these symptoms present, it's going to be very difficult for you to get the child to cooperate with you. So, in short, what is the take home message for today's talk? Posture affects respiration. From whatever we have seen so far, I'm sure it is clear to you all that posture does affect respiration. Okay, correct that baseline posture. You need to have a good starting position or a good baseline posture before you start working. Okay, if your sitting is altered or if your head control is altered, please do not start with any training. Facilitate respiration if possible before starting therapy. I'm sure we are all a part of a rehab team, so it becomes easier for you to request someone to start with respiration facilitation before you start with any other therapy. So breath is the sustenance of life. Improvement in any domain, whether it is gross motor or oromotor control, requires optimum breathing, without which rehabilitation is not going to sustain. Develop your observational skills for spotting respiratory distress and poor postural alignment, and learn basic skills to correct the posture. Okay. So thank you so much, and thanks again for inviting me. to this talk, Tanvi.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I'm sure it will be useful to all the professionals and students who were attending this webinar. Now we have a few questions. So can I go ahead?
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
So the first question is that if a developing child, a 6 months old baby, sits for a long time without any support, does it lead to any spinal cord damage?
No, it doesn't lead to any spinal cord damage, but it will certainly lead to a lot of vertebral damage. Okay. Remember, muscles and fascia are your first line of defense, then becomes the bone, and then comes the internal neural structures. The spinal cord per se may not be affected, but your fascia and your vertebral alignment is definitely going to get affected if you keep sitting in an abnormal position for a long time.
Okay. So the next question is there any case where psi is absent in normal children also?
Very rarely. Very rarely. In fact, sighing is considered a parameter of having normalcy. So, unless you are in very deep sleep, even in that case with children, if you observe, sighing happens by default. Okay. So, very rare. I have never really seen any child who is normal and he doesn't have any sigh.
Okay. Okay. So the next question is can we use PNF for children?
Of course, you can all the time, right from day one. Where you give, in fact, when we give chest physiotherapy to neonates in the ICU, PNF is the first thing that we use. Okay, obviously, your handling has to be much more gentle than you do in case of adults, but PNF can most certainly be given in children.
Okay. Can we perform these exercises with the patient? Is the question.
Which exercises?
It's not mentioned actually.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, I'll move on to the next question. During therapy, we often come across that the neck keeps falling when the child is
Yes.
sitting. Are there any
Yes.
strategies or techniques to improve a good neck posture?
Yes. It's difficult for me to show you, but if you sit with your hips and knees flexed, I'm talking about you as a therapist. Okay, with your back supported against a wall, flex your hips and knees. You must have seen that posture that mothers use to cradle their children. Okay, if you're sitting with a flexed hip and knee, and if you put your child along the length of your femur, okay, with your hand support the cervical spine, and if you don't want to use your hand, put any roll of towel or something in the cervical lordosis. Okay, that stabilizes the cervical spine, and it will give the child an optimum angle to look at you. Okay, I'll try and find a picture for you. I'll mail it to Tanvi, so I guess she can forward it to you later.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. There is a question about receiving an e-certificate. There will be no e-certificate for this webinar. Okay, so the next question is uh, W sitting
W
seen
sitting.
in children a bad sitting posture? If so,
Mhm.
what are its consequences?
Okay, W sitting per se, if you're talking with respect to respiration, it doesn't have an effect on respiration, but it does have an effect on your pelvis alignment, pelvic alignment. Okay, the more you go into W sitting, you're going into internal rotation at the hip joint. Okay, the internal rotators are going to be extremely tight, including the IT band. And so when you make the patient stand up, okay, the pelvis gets pulled because of the tightness of internal rotators. So you cannot encourage the child to stand and walk if you have a continuous W sitting. It is very comfortable for the child, but if you're working on milestones, it's going to be very difficult.
Okay, okay. How to break reflex patterns which does not integrate on time?
All right, now that is a job of a physical therapist, how to reflect, how to integrate those reflex patterns. um, that's where your entire exercise program and the other things come in. I mean, it's a long answer, so I don't know if I have time to share it right now, but that's what your physical therapist is going to do.
Okay. Um, any brief introduction about what therapy techniques are used for this?
You have a lot of techniques. You have NDT, you have motor learning, you have Carr and Shepherd approach. Uh, I'm sure sensory integration also helps. Okay, I'm
Okay.
sure you are aware of sensory integration,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So that used correctly, along with a good amount of NDT, will also help you to integrate your primitive reflexes. Okay,
Okay.
and primarily, if you're talking about respiration, the TLR that interferes with respiration. Okay, avoid treating the child in supine at any cost, whether it is physical therapy or it is speech therapy. The moment you put the child in supine, you're going to trigger the TLR. Okay, so if you can't make the child sit for whatever reasons, then you need to put them on a side lying position and treat that. Side lying is always a better position than supine if you want to avoid primitive reflexes. Remember that.
Okay. Okay. Now there is a participant here who has a younger sister and has bilateral CP, and she has lots of drooling. So could you tell what
Okay.
therapy should be given to stop drooling, and
Okay.
what kind of therapy to be given?
See, basically, drooling happens because you have oral hypotonia. Okay, so you have your orbicularis oris, which is undertoned. So you need to start with a lot of oral facilitation. Okay, you can use tactile facilitation. You can use foodstuffs. You can use stuff like chocolates or even citrus ones. Okay, you need to encourage the contraction of orbicularis oris. The moment you do that, the drooling is going to stop. Okay, so oral facilitation.
Okay. Okay, so that's all with the questions. And for those of you who have asked for the PPT, you can mail at the email ID given in the chat section. I will get back to you. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. It was great. Thank you, everybody,
Thank
for
you.
attending. And we will be coming up with more videos and more webinars. And please follow us on Instagram and YouTube for if you want any topic of your choice to be discussed or to be asked. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. I'll end the meeting. It was great
Thank you.
having you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting.